Right. We are beginning our study, continuing really our study of Illumination, a guide to the Buddhist Method of No-Method by Rebecca Lee. And last week I did an introduction to Chan, right, the Chinese school that we know as Zen. And I just gave a brief outline of, Buddhism moving from India to China, where it then spread to Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and eventually to the West, morphing as it traveled, so that we have now what we know as in our tradition, the Japanese iteration of Zen. That is not so different, certainly not in substance, not in spirit, to the Chinese Chan. But I think it is worthwhile to mention, something that Rebecca Lee points out in her book, and that is that in China, Chan and Pure Land Buddhism coexisted, right, in Buddhist monasteries. So these two practices coexisted. And it was really only until Chan became Zen in Japan that Zen monasteries, exclusively Zen monasteries, were established. And the reason I think this is relevant is because, for two reasons. One, that you will see traces of Pure Land teachings in some of the koans and in the teaching of some of the Chinese and even some of the Japanese masters, some of whom considered, recitation of the Nembutsu, which was the main practice in Pure Land Buddhism, that it was just as effective a path to enlightenment. And then there were those teachers who criticized it, Hakuin being one of them. But that for many of them, Dogen included, when they trained in these various traditions. And as I had mentioned at some point in a previous study, many of these teachers were very well versed in the sutras, in the early sutras as well as the Mahayana sutras. And so when they're offering their teachings, which in Zen tend to be very, very pithy, very direct, generally speaking, that teaching, that very pithy teaching, was really backed up by those thousands of years of Buddhist study and Buddhist teaching and commentary. And so because our tradition is, has no reliance on words and letters, and we say it's a direct transmission, it doesn't mean that it is separate in any way, or that it is disconnected from everything that came before it. And so, and if you think now of teachers who, for example, have brought psychotherapy in the West very much into the practice of Zen, or teachers who are in a different religious tradition, in the Jewish tradition, for example, or Islam doesn't seem to have merged well, but particularly Christianity and Judaism, and the way that they have sometimes brought in the teachings from their own tradition into the teachings of Zen, but then also more closely related, to these Buddhist schools coexisting. Some of my friends teach in both the Zen and Theravada tradition, for example, the Vipassana tradition, or teach Zen and Vajrayana Buddhism. And their teaching and practice and the training that they then give to their students is informed by that. So Buddhism has always done this. It has always both adapted to the society, the culture where it found itself, and it has also merged and sometimes has taken in the teachings from other schools and other traditions in my view, making it richer, keeping it relevant, and really addressing the needs of the students that were coming, to these teachers. Because when that synthesis is done well, it can, in fact, really enrich the path of practice and realization. If it's not done well, it can confuse the students. So it's really important to do it well and to do it carefully. Now, the teaching, the phrase itself, silent illumination, it first appears, a variant of it first appears in China around the 9th century. And there was one teacher, Guifeng Zongmi, who, as I was mentioning, just before, he studied Huayan, the flower garland sutra, and there was a whole school based on it, so the Avatamsaka Sutra. He studied Huayan and Chan. And he spoke of the mind, and he was a great scholar and teacher who seems to have spent, his entire life trying to bring in all these different streams of teaching and categorize them and make sense of them. And particularly to answer to bring together two apparently disparate teachings. One, that you have to work hard to realize yourself, to awaken, so that you gradually train and you consistently, wipe away the dust from the mind in order to realize your own nature. And the other teaching that says, actually, you don't really have to do that because you're already awakened. You're already realized. And that is what you need to see. So there is no process there is no goal other than the process itself, right, of that realization. And so how is that possible? Some 400 years after him, Dogen himself was asking, why is it that if we are all already enlightened, why do we have to practice? And then in his whole body of teaching, he himself essentially said, because we don't know, right? Because we don't see, because of the obscurations in our minds, the kleshas, the vexations, as Sheng Yen taught, and Rebecca Lee uses the term, everything that obscures that inherent natural luminosity of the mind gets in the way of that realization. And so Zongmi, trying to bring these teachings together, spoke of the mind as being intrinsically enlightened. And he called it this quality of the mind, clear tranquility, or clear and bright, unobscured, ever-present awareness. And so you hear echoes of that, in Rebecca's teaching. She's saying, Shikantaza, silent illumination is really the practice of being present, completely aware, moment after moment after moment. And also, if you think about it, this term silent illumination is very much picking up on and using what in Vipassana, what in the Theravada tradition is called that stopping and seeing, right? The calming of the mind and the cultivation of insight. Because every teacher that has practiced at some point has said it is not enough to quiet the mind. It is not enough to be still if you're not going to see. And this was one of the early criticisms of silent illumination. Dawei, who was, very much a proponent of koan study, used to criticize. He used this term silent illumination pejoratively. He said, you people are just kind of sitting there blankly. But, later it turned out that they were actually friends. Hongzhi, who actually uses the term, he was the one who first used the term silent illumination. Him and Dawei were actually friends. And so maybe the rivalry was, to get patronage, to get monastics, to go to the Rinzai monasteries and away from the Caodong, the Soto monasteries. So, maybe some of it was politics, maybe some of it was show. But it looks like they actually really respected one another's teachings, and criticized or not, Hongzhi actually never tried to defend himself against Daoi's criticism. He probably didn't feel that he had to, and he did extensive koan study himself. He compiled the Book of Serenity, which is in our lineage. So a student will work on the Book of Serenity pretty far along in their training. And it's a really beautiful, beautiful collection because it's very poetic. The commentary, which Hongzhi put together, and the verses he wrote are really just stunning, stunning literature. So it wasn't like he wasn't versed himself in koan study. So, but he brings forth this term, silent illumination, to describe this clear, luminous, awakened mind. And he says, the essence is to empty and open out body and mind as expansive as the great emptiness of space. Naturally, in the entire territory, all is satisfied. I really like that phrase, naturally in the entire territory of your mind, of your heart, and therefore, hopefully, in the territory that you inhabit, all is satisfied. Why? Because nothing is missing. Nothing is left out. This body being vast as space is not restless, does not want. And this not wanting, Joseph Goldstein says, in the Vipassana tradition, this not wanting is the essence of liberation. This is the state that we're practicing to embody, the place of no craving. So liberation is cessation. It's cessation, specifically from the round of birth and death, from the cycle of samsara. But what drives it is ignorance that leads to craving. And we know from the Four Noble Truths, the second noble truth, that the root of suffering is craving. Like Rebecca says, how does she say it? The present moment plus vexations equals suffering. And vexation, vexation is annoyance, right? It's anger, it's restlessness, it's impatience about not getting what we want, about having to face what we don't want, about not being able to keep what we want and have. And so, if you look at this term of silent illumination, this teaching of silent illumination, you can really see how well it fits the scheme of the Buddhist teachings. So Chan says, we're already enlightened. We're already vast as space. That's where we start. When we see this through practice and realization, naturally, all is satisfied. So there's nothing you need to do other than to see this. Naturally, all is satisfied and there's no more craving. With the end of craving comes peace. Perfect peace. Which of course begs the question, well, how do you see that? How do you see that you're already vast as space when your mind feels small and overcrowded most of the time? And then Hongzhi offers a very pithy, direct instruction. Stay with that, just as that. Stay with this, just as this. One of you brought this up recently, that phrase stayed with you. I mean, you really could just practice with that, probably for the rest of your life, and never exhaust it. Stay with that, just as that. Stay with this, just as this. Essentially, that is the practice of silent illumination. So practically speaking, you're sitting on your cushion. You don't move, don't fidget, don't fix, don't pull close, don't push away. In my own words, attend, allow, accept what is coming up moment after moment after moment. In Rebecca's words, let through, well, in her teacher's words, let through, let be, let go. Sounds so simple. And why is it so difficult to do? How do we stay with what we can't even see a lot of the time? How do we remain unmoving in the face of reality? Not disconnected, right? Not distant, but still. Engaged, but not entangled. You must completely withdraw from the invisible pounding and weaving of your ingrained ideas. This is Huangzhi again. If you want to be rid of this invisible turmoil, you must just sit through it and let go of everything. So that's the bad news. You must sit through it. The good news is that all you have to do is sit through it. There is no other way. There really isn't. Before I watched the short video with Master Sheng Yen teaching, and he was saying that when he first came to the United States, that he had Americans going up to him and say, can you just teach me sudden enlightenment? Because, I don't have a lot of time to meditate. So just, tell me what to do so I can get on with it. And he was like, so sorry, but this is not like a pill. It doesn't work that way. And then he goes on to say, to speak all about, sudden and gradual enlightenment, which turned into a whole debate in the Zen school. It is an instant. It is an instant. So that's why I say, never, ever, ever underestimate your zazen. You could be sitting there completely asleep one moment, and the next moment something happens. You have no idea why, and something is awakened. So don't cut yourself short. Don't ever think, oh, this is not good zazen. Just give yourself to it. That's it. And it also happens gradually over a long period of time. Even after great realizations, teachers throughout history continue to practice and train, to clarify, to integrate, to actualize, my teacher used to say. And so, does it matter really whether it's sudden or gradual? Really, all we need to know is that the way is right where we stand, right where we sit. Right, Rebecca is saying in the book, you don't even have to, it's not even about zazen per se. Daido used to say the same thing. He said, zazen is not meditation. Zen, he would say, Zen is not meditation. It's not contemplation. It's not quieting the mind. It's not focusing the mind. It's not mindfulness. It's not mindlessness. Zen is a way of using your mind. It's a way of living your life and doing it with other people. He would say that every introductory retreat. So I heard it every month for 20-some years. So it's not about your cushion even, but it is about how you're moving through your life, moment to moment, how you're using your awareness, your attention. And the stillness is important. A stillness of being is not even I mean, yes, there is that literal stillness, but there's a stillness of being that is needed so that you can actually illuminate, like not miss what is happening. And think for a moment about the implication of this inherent Buddhahood. We hear this all the time. Well, you're already a Buddha, you're already enlightened, you just have to see it. And that is true. That is, in fact, true. But also, very practically, this means, and I say this often, that there's not really anything you need to do, at least for the duration of your zazen, whether that's 15 minutes or an hour, however long it is. For that period of time, you can really let yourself rest in not striving, not performing, not achieving, not fixing, not becoming anything. And if that is not a relief to you, then your life is much more peaceful, than mine. To truly practice staying with that just as that, staying with this just as this, includes staying with that just as that, with this just as this, as it is. There is practice, but you don't have to work hard at it. You don't have to direct yourself toward it. You can really just trust that bringing your full awareness to bear to the moment, that is all that you need to do. How wonderful. I wish I had taken that seriously much, much sooner. It would have saved me a lot of unnecessary struggle. When Hongzhi was 18, he went to study with a Caodong teacher. So Caodong is the Chinese Soto school. That's really where it started before it moved to Japan. Rinzai is the Lingji school. Very, very generally speaking, the Lingji school is associated with koan study. The Caodong school is associated with just sitting, silent illumination, shikantaza. Which is not always used exactly interchangeably, but for now, I think it suffices. As you know, there's a lot of crossover, our own tradition and our own lineage in the MRO. There's both. There's both schools, Linji and Caodong, Soto and Rinzai. And therefore the practice, we do shikantaza, we do koan study. But so Hongzhi went to study with a Caodong teacher whose name was Kumu Fa Cheng. And it was said that Kumu's style of practice was such that he sat so still that his body was like a block of dry wood. And so I'm assuming his teacher gave him the name Kumu Fa Cheng, which means dry wood, complete Dharma. And Hongzhi, studying with him at that early age, saw this, and I think he realized there is something in this stillness. There is something very powerful happening here. Because obviously it's not that people had not been sitting still before, but Zongmi starts to articulate this sense of that calm clarity that he called it. So that was 9th century, so in the 800s. And then about 300 years later, Hongzhi is coming, and he's the one who starts to use the term silent illumination. And I always think of one of the koans, one of my favorite koans in the miscellaneous koans, which is a poem. Sitting in a room in absolute silence. Mind source unmoved, like filled, like still water. The striking of thunder opens the gate of the head's crown. Beginningless self-nature has been awakened. So sitting in a room in absolute silence, mind source unmoved, filled like still water. Right? That's the still water that I speak of, where you drop in your little pebble, your question. Life koan or traditional koan. And the poem says that when the thunder strikes, that the gate of the head's crown opens, but really that's still water. It's already your awakened nature. So the thunder is just that, is the thing that wakes you up. It helps you to see. But if the water is really still, it could be a single drop of rain that shows you your nature. And that is why in the koans, sometimes, a student will hear a line from a sutra. Sometimes somebody will break their leg, like Yunmen, and realize themselves. But sometimes somebody will just hear a line from a sutra. Somebody will hear the sound of rain. It's not about the thing, it's about the mind being filled like still water. Because in that space, as Rebecca describes, she does that so nicely, inside and outside merge. So the sound of thunder, the sound of a car, the sound of rain, it doesn't happen outside. It doesn't happen inside either. It simply happens. Just as you happen, moment after moment after moment. So body, mind, and environment are unified. Grogu gives a nice image for the silent illumination. He says it's like a room filled with furniture. And he says the silence is the space in the room. Your Buddha nature is the space in the room. So it doesn't matter how you arrange the furniture, it doesn't affect the space. And that illumination, that realization brought about by the practice is, okay, I arrange the furniture in this way, I arrange it that way, or maybe people come into the room, people leave the room. The configuration changes, but that Buddha nature is never affected, is never obscured. That's why we say, you can't offend the Dharma. I mean, people, we offend one another sometimes in the Dharma, but you can't do anything to the Dharma itself because it is complete, it is undefiled.